welcome everyone. Hello. I'm so happy to have you all here. My name is Almudena, Sevilla, for those who do not know me, and I'm a professor here at Social Policy, and I also the research deputy head of department, organizing the seminars this year. And today we have two presenters. We have Kevin, is our first presenting, Kevin Zapata-Celestino, who is a teaching fellow here in the department. He specializes in social science research, focused on qualitative methods. He holds a PhD from the University of Edinburgh. His interest center around violence and informal social protection in Mexico and Latin America. So Kevin is going to talk us through his research agenda in this topic. And I'm going to introduce our second speaker as well, because transition is going to be fast given other seminars that we've had this way. Jill, who is sitting right there, Ingrid. So Jill has a PhD in economics and an MPA from Princeton University, and has previously worked at the IMF, World Bank Institute for Fiscal Studies and Frontier Economics. Sorry, Jillian. I almost called you Jill. I'm sorry. Jillian Paul. I'm sorry. Okay, Jillian's research has focused on analyzing and evaluating policy relating to early years, childcare, women's employment, and poverty. Delivered not just academic outputs, but also a lot of policy-related research. For example, reports for the Department of Work and Pensions, the Department of Education, etc. She's a specialist advisor to the House of Lords Committee on Affordable Childcare. She's currently a senior visiting fellow at CASE, which is the Anya will tell us, CASE, Center for
Analysis of Social Exclusion.
Thank you. So, Kevin, the floor is yours after the long introduction. For 45 minutes for each, and I'll be.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming. I'm gonna present what's been part of my research for the last 2 years, which is focused on explaining bullying through the eyes of bullies, particularly the lessons from Mexico. This is a research that I've been conducting with Daniela Manriquez Madrigal from Monterrey Tech. The structure of the presentation goes as follows. First, I'm gonna introduce the context of Mexico, then briefly explain some of the theoretical approaches of the research. Then I will explain how we actually reach that difficult populations, the methodology in general. Then I'm gonna go through the main findings and discussion, a brief discussion on the challenges for policy intervention, and finally the conclusion. Now, what motivates a student to become a bully was our guiding question, and that is because there's a common narrative that pretty much oversimplify bullying and leaving those individuals as monsters with inherently evil nature. And we can see this a lot in pop culture. We can think, for example, in Nelson of The Simpsons, that was just an evil character there, just whose whole purpose is just bothering the others. To give you some context, in Mexico, according to the latest figures, we have a massive problem. We have 3.3 million of adolescents being victims of bullying, and 2.9 million of adolescents victims of cyberbullying, although there are many specialists that say that pretty much is an underestimation. Now, according to the average, according to the OCDE, Mexico will be in the average of the organization. However, other estimations indicate that probably Mexico is ranking first worldwide. According to those estimations, for example, Bullying Without Borders, 7 out of 10 children suffer from some form of bullying in Mexico, contributing to 60% of child suicide in the country. Now, we might think that the numbers are already grim, but when we delve into the cases, then we have even a worse panorama. For example, we have the case of normalised, whose case went viral because pretty much her death was recorded on video and went all over Twitter and other social media. Here we can have a piece of that video. Now we have the case of Patricia, who was stabbed by her own student in the middle of the classroom, and also the attack was recorded on video. We have the case of Juan, who was born alive in the school by other peers, or we have the case of this 8-year-old boy who was raped in the toilet of the school. And actually, it's a systemic problem in the state of Puebla. So we have these cases happening, but we have a lot of inaction. And this is because historically, bullying has not been seen as a social problem that deserves policy attention. In fact, the popular opinion in Mexico is that bullying is an issue that should be addressed individually, notably using more violence. And here we have a great representation of what's going on in Mexico. This is from a movie called Los Santos Reyes from 1959, but still applies nowadays. The kids tell to the teacher, "Teacher, that boy hit me." The answer is marvelous. "So, don't you have hands? Hit him back." And unfortunately, in a nutshell, is how until nowadays we solve many of our problems within schools. Now, bullying is also sometimes confused with the more general concept, which is school violence, but that entails way more actions and behavior. So to be specific, bullying is defined by 3 main components, which is an aggression marked by intentionality, repetition, and power imbalance. And these might include verbal, physical, psychological, and digital forms, ranging from physical attacks, insults, rumors, gossip, exclusion, to cyberbullying and sexual harassment. Now, typically, bullying occurs in classrooms, corridors, and recreational areas, often without the supervision of teachers, and is more prevalent in classrooms with negative climates and weak moral atmospheres. That is, that there are no values such as solidarity, tolerance, patience, reciprocity, etc. And peer dynamics also play a role, and this is a key role actually, because they tend to reinforce bullying. And weak student-teacher relationships also exacerbate the problem. Bullies can be categorized in many ways, and these can overlap in many others. So we can have aggressive bullies, those that use direct violence. We can have bully and victims, those that retaliate. We have social bullies that use social manipulations. We have bystander bullies, those that support through approval. We have strategic bullies that use aggression to gain status, or we have cyberbullies. And victims are often targeted by different reasons, including physical traits, disability, behaviors, identity, and other markers such as gender, race, or religion. The impact of bullying can be very profound, not only in the short term, but can have long-term consequences, include academic decline, truancy, physical injuries, psychological distress, reduced social and economic purposes. There are more studies that indicate that victims of bullying in the long run generate less income than others that were not bullied. Now, some of the theoretical approaches, rather than use just one big general framework, for example, the ecological system framework, we decided to use a combination of different approaches to try to delve into the microdynamics of aggression. Now, the first big approach, it was from social psychology, which is the social cognitive theory, which emphasized that behaviors are learned through observation and social interaction. There is a triad between person, behavior, and environment that reinforced the specific behavior. So in this case, for bullying, individuals mimic aggressive behaviors seen in peers, adults, and other figures, especially when this goes unpunished or is rewarded. The exposure to normalized violence in family, community, or other settings also reinforce this kind of behavior. And we have Bandura's moral disengagement concept, which in individuals selectively decided to deactivate internal moral standards to rationalize their behavior and being able to live with it. We also use some aspects of the social identity theory, which will explain bullying as a maintained group belonging. since we are social animals, we have an inherent need to be part of a group and being accepted. We have the desire for positive distinction that might lead also to aggression towards those labeled as outsiders. We also use components of social dominance theory, which in this case, bullying will be framed as a method to reinforce or climb the social ladder and the hierarchy based on race, gender, or class. And in this case, aggressor use bullying to assert dominance or gain access to specific resources and privileges. And those seeking to improve their status may also engage reproducing even further those inequalities. From a sociological perspective, we use post-structuralism, and from a Foucauldian perspective, we made emphasis on power. And bullying can function as a disciplinary mechanism or tool to enforce conformity and punish deviance. And the idea of not fitting or misfitting can trigger that aggression. From a feminist post-structuralist perspective, we try to highlight how language constructs social norms and identity, reinforcing those systems of control. Dominant narrative around masculinity and femininity pretty much shapes behavior of what is accepted or should be punished in schools. And this led to normalization of gender violence and exclusion. Now, about the methodology, there is a growing body of research and literature that delves into the experience of the students, but we noticed that there was a missing part of actually asking and exploring the perspectives and the worldviews of the aggressors themselves. So we decided to conduct semi-structured interviews with adults who admitted having participated in bullying during primary and low secondary school, which will be grade 1 to 9. Why former bullies or why adults? Well, two main reasons. First, we considered that the adults were more capable to reflect more in their past behavior and offering an answer about what they did, to whom they did, how they did, and why they did it. And also because we want to minimize any risk when interviewing minors for this purpose. So we use snowball sampling, leveraging in our own network to reach those access populations. We started with our own network, and after we identify some potential participants, they refer to others, thus creating a reference chain that help us to gain access to 20 individuals, from which we interview 15, and at the end, we only considered 13 for this specific study. 2 were discarded for ethical reasons. And the participants were selected based on 2 main criteria. First of all, they had to be from the cohorts of millennials and Generation Z, which is from 21 to 42 maximum, to have some coherence in their answers. And they must be active bullies. That is, that they actively engage in aggression, direct aggression. And the reason why I decided only focus on elementary school or basic school as known in Mexico is because we consider that first, this is the fundamental stage in which behavior is created and consolidated, but also because it differs greatly from other types of bullying in later school stages. Now we can see here the 13 interviews that we conducted. Because of the nature of the snow sampling, most of it is in Northeast Mexico. Unfortunately, we could only access to 3 women, 10 males. And of course, we follow ethical protocols. We support ourselves with the help of a social worker and a psychologist to prevent any harm, considering that this could be a bit disturbing for the participants. The general script was flexible, although here are some of the guiding questions that guide our conversation with them, how they will describe their experience during elementary school, what they think about bullying, their main causes, what they motivated, to whom their actions were targeted, how they felt, how they think they were perceived, if they thought that their action had consequences, if they think they ever went too far, if they had any influence from media or social media, what they believe about their teachers or their parents to prevent bullying, and what kind of actions could be implemented to stop bullying. Those questions were not written in stone, were flexible. We asked more probing questions depending of how the conversation was developing. And I'm just gonna present some of the main findings and discussions. Here is just a summary of the article that is already published. However, like there's way more than this. And the first thing is that, findings discussion, okay. So the first thing is that individuals' behavior and motivations. So we can see that there's a behavior that stems from exposure to violence in families, communities, and institutions. Interviews describe it as a learned behavior in normalized, that normalized aggression in those environments. So, for example, in one participant said, we grow up in a violent environment, starting with the family. It's a violent setting. Growing up in an environment makes you defensive and looking for someone to attack. Or this participant who said, my brother used to pinch my nipples and say, squeal pig, or grab me by the fat on my stomach. I wouldn't let go until they made me cry. It was bloody abuse one day after another, so I will go to school and do the same things to my classmates. The same things that my brother did to me, I will go and do the same. So what we can see is that those experiences support research showing that how domestic and institutional environments influence children's behavior. And Bandura, in this sense, emphasized the importance of observational learning and the role of environmental reinforcing in those modeling aggressions. So in this case, many of the participants actually were explicit that by engaging in bullying, they obtained some sort of reward. If you want to be the popular, it was either by being really good at sports or being good at fighting, and everyone will cheer you on. So tell me, how the hell are you supposed to change if everyone keeps celebrating your stupid behavior, no matter how much you make life miserable to others? Furthermore, some participants describe bullying as a game that helps establish connection. In this case, we could see some of the moral disengagement that Bandura states. Joking around was how we made friends. This was what we understood. It was the way people made friends. Or it's something you do unconsciously. We used to tease people. We always did. It's only hindsight. I really wasn't right. We made life miserable for a lot of people just because it was funny. Those narratives reveal some level of diffusion of responsibility that minimize individual guilt. It's always a collective thing that you do just because. In the same line, we consider it, according to the the SIT perspective, bullying operates as a social identification that helps individuals to secure belonging. So you will give someone a slap in the back of the head, but it wasn't like you want to hurt them. It was your way of saying, we are mates. Maybe later it will be your turn to get one, but there was no bad intention behind it. That was the way our group got along, and you had to put up with it if you wanted to be part of it. If you complain, no one will invite you anymore. So this illustrates how aggression became a form of bonding, where inclusion required tolerance to aggression and violence. And despite of the hostility, and that we can say that those practices are utterly negative and toxic, those practices create social meaning that later develops into more complex relational dynamics that reinforce those social groups. From social dominance theory, we can see bullying as a way to assert dominance within the hierarchical systems created at schools. Schools reflect microsystems that respond and create to social asymmetries, where bullying often occupies the top and the victims remain at the bottom. One of the female participants clearly stated, she was the queen bee. I admire her. I want to be like her. Or another one who was more explicit even, one time a kid challenged me. We chased him away with stones. We made him cry, run and cry. Yes, we injured him, but not badly. At first I had no voice. I was at the lowest rank. But in the end, people followed me. I was the leader. That time we threw stones, it was because of me. I was the leader. Or rankings were based on who won most of the fights. So once hierarchies are established, especially when they are left unchanged by the authorities, we can see that they solidify over time, and thus creates a marginalizations, which students that are victims remain trapped as subordinates. So in response to those social hierarchies created at schools, some participants describe using bullying as strategically to avoid victimizations or try to improve their status. It's not you actually want to do it, but if you don't, others will do it to you. So to avoid being part of the group that everyone is always picking on, you sometimes join the bullying. It is a matter of survival. Or if the findings reveal the aggressions functioned as a self-preservation strategy, even that the participant maybe didn't want to be involved in this kind of dynamic, they saw it as a safe mechanism in order to become victims. So this kind of reinforced the dominance and the whole reproductions of the asymmetries. From a sociological perspective, we found that bullying reflects the dynamics of domination and subordination shaped by collective behaviors and structural relations. From the concept of disciplinary power understood as the form of social control that operates through surveillance, normalization, and punishments that helps explain how schools foster environments in which behaviors are constantly monitored. But not only through formal authorities, but the students themselves. This kind of creates mechanisms of control that enforce norms. So I think this is also a very good example, and that pretty much tell us how the students punish others who break those established orders. There's always one kid who says, "Miss, are you going to collect the homework?" You think that kid's gonna get his ass kicked, since you knew that many kids never did their homework. So he got his ass kicked. That was a reminder the next time he opened his mouth, things will go badly for him. So peer-sanctioned punishment reinforces behavioral norms. Bullying thus becomes a disciplinary tool to regulate defiance and reinforcing social control. So pretty much, if you go and snitch, for sure others will bully you. Everyone knows that is how it works. In a nutshell, snitches get stitches, but it's how operates within those systems. So Thornberg notes that bullying is often framed as a deserved hostility, which victims are blamed for violating group expectations. We can also see that in the first quote. "Do you remember for making fun of me?" So pretty much what happened is an aggression after that, because there's specific social norms and the kid just went over those. Bullying also serves as a mechanism for enforcing gender roles. The schools are saturated with are known as normative cruelties that legitimize gender-based exclusion. And we can see, for example, one participant tell us, "They called you the boss, the alpha, the guy with big balls. You feel invincible." It was being a proper macho, a real macho. A guy who doesn't fight back is labeled as pathetic, coward, pansy, less of a man. So we can see that students respond and they're very reactive to hegemonic discourses, and the need of showing, at least in the case of the boys, to show masculinity is a main driver for aggressive behavior. So the students shape their actions according to those discourses, which we can also understand them as a form of social control through language and culture that reinforces idealized gender roles. Children who deviate from those norms are marginalized. Here's one of the participants. "Do you remember La Escuelita de Jorge, a TV show in Latin America? Do you remember the character of Agapito? He was the poof that everyone made fun just because he was gay. Well, our own Agapito also got picked every single day, and the guy wasn't even unpleasant. He was nice. He didn't bother anyone, but he was the gay one. And just because of that, they bullied him." Another participant recalls, "He was a friendly and neat, while the rest of us were messy. We started to call him Mari, or butterfly in Spanish, and other homophobic slurs. We bullied him just because for being clean, because there is this idea that as a boy, you must be nasty and dirty and sweaty. And if you are well-groomed, then you must be gay." And while not all students supported this hostility against individuals out of norm, many fear stigma contagion. To be honest, I didn't care about his sexual orientation, but I wasn't going to stick for him. People would say he was my boyfriend. People are cruel. I knew I would be in trouble, so no thank you. So the idea of being punished for aligning with other individuals out of forms perpetuates harmful discourses within schools. Now, about the roles of parents and teachers, when bullying is viewed only as a individual behavioral issue, most of the responses focus only on punitive measures. But participants pretty much said that were very ineffective. Getting suspended might annoy your parents, but not much else. Or I got expelled for burning a teacher's book. My parents sent me to another school, but it was full of other expelled students. It felt more like a reward. So another important barrier related to this is that the students' reluctance to report bullying. This is silence fears from retaliation, normalized violence, and distrust of adults and authorities. As one participant observed, a teacher gave us a box to report bullies anonymously. No one wrote anything. No one wants to be the class snitch. Or I once said, like, after we did, the kid never told anyone. They need to lose the fear to asking for help. But breaking this silence required stronger parental-child communication. One participant described that this was the turning point in his behavior. I stopped bullying when my mother talked to me. I started crying and begged to change my ways. In that moment, I knew I had to change. I need to calm down. I opened to her. We had a long discussion. I decided I was not going to be part of that again. And many other participants said that that was the turning point, where they could finally establish a communication either with their parents, with other authority figures. However, this communication was most of the cases. Most parents do not talk with their children. They will come home all tired, making sure that the house is not a mess. But many times, if you tell to your parents what you had a problem, you actually end up worse. There's a lot of distrust in the communication between children and the parents. Or there's other significant barrier related to the labor market conditions in Mexico. My mom worked from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. She was exhausted. Sometimes she would return home all stressed and angry. She went straight to sleep. Do you think she had time to talk? We only saw each other on weekends. Don't get me wrong. I love my mom, but we never talk about these things. And again, we have a systematical barrier in the labor market and the lack of work-life balance that prevent this communication to happen in the first place. Teachers also play an essential role in this, but unfortunately, as the participant indicated, many times they lack of training or resources to address bullying effectively. The teachers was always the last to find out. I don't know whether she didn't care or what, but teachers were clueless. We were so many, more than 40 in the classroom, and the teacher simply can't keep an eye on that many kids. Things can happen right under the nose and they don't notice, or they just give it a toss as long as you don't cross the line. They will only intervene if someone cried, but otherwise they let the place burn. Or the second one, which also I would say this is one of my favorite quotes, is one time I gave a lad a whack on the head. I hit him on the back of the head with a stick, a broom handle. He cried and started shouting, she hit me. The teacher said, it was an accident. And I just rubbed the kid's head and nothing happened. So effective classroom management and clear rules help to create a safe environment. However, we have to be conscious of reality in Mexico. Teachers work in a very difficult conditions. Evidence shows that teachers, especially in public schools, experience high levels of burnout, lack of institutional support. They work in underfunded institutions, or many times they are completely non-trained for address these kind of situations. So just very briefly about challenges for policy and intervention. From our lessons, we can see that it's necessary to incorporate critical reflection on peer group norms, power relations, mechanisms of moral disengagement, helping students to recognize and challenge behavior that are socially rewarded but harmful. So the literature is very explicit that there are many ways to try to address this through restorative justice practices, introducing social emotional learning in the curriculum, teacher training for prevention and intervention, or school-led parenting sessions focused on strengthening communicational and emotional skills. Here, the big question, especially for designing and implemented any kind of program or intervention, is that we must consider the conditions that this could be implemented in Mexico. We cannot think about school-led parenting sessions if the parents do not have time to attend to none. We cannot think on teacher training if they already have such a burden in their schedule. They don't have time, they don't have incentive, they are not properly paid. We cannot think on restorative justice practices if their parents themselves are the one who motivates the aggression. So it's a big challenge. However, this is open for discussion. So just to conclude, the research provides valuable empirical evidence on bullying from the perspective of the aggressors. we try to complement the missing part in the literature by delving into the experiences of those that actively engage in violence. We move from one-dimensional view of bullying, and we try to give voice to those that are often neglected in the conversation. The findings highlight that bullying often stems from deep-rooted issues such as dysfunctional family dynamics, exposure to violence in various contexts, poorly managed dynamics of identity, belonging, and domination with the schools, as well normalized toxic discourse contributing to foster aggression. Addressing these factors is critical in designing intervention that move beyond punitive measures and address broader social environment conditions. Participants emphasize that both parental involvement and well-trained teachers play crucial roles in preventing bullying. However, the remaining question is how we actually implement that in Mexican or Latin American context. Thank you so much.